Welcome to Kubernetes SIG Cloud Provider for October 11th, 2023. We are governed by the CNCF Code of Conduct, so please be kind and be excellent to one another. Let's see, we have just a few things on the agenda so far, and I wanted to pop over to the needs triage issues. Though, Mike, I think you were saying that possibly one of these is the one that you have more info about. I'm not sure if we.
I
I know
don't
that
know,
we
but
have.
I think there was a
The
new
Slack
issue
thread.
that showed up. Yeah, no, that's
Okay.
separate. We don't have an issue for that
Okay.
yet. But I think I did see a new issue show up in KK that was a cloud
Yeah.
provider thing.
Yeah, so we got a couple from just a few days ago. So it looks like we need triage on these. Let's take a look. This one is talking about 1.26 GCP, possibly load balancer related, using internal load balancers and hey, look at that. Possibly a fix. Is this something that we want to look into more, triage, accept? What are folks thinking from the Google side?
Yeah, I think it'd be good to like pass this on to Bowie or even Antonio.
Okay.
They're definitely more plugged into just bouncing than I am.
Okay. It
Okay.
looks like
Yeah.
Antonio's already CC'd.
Yeah, I would just assign or I would just triage it, especially if the PR of the fix already has Antonio assigned as a reviewer, then it's kind of handled already.
Okay. Let's check that out and make sure. Yes, he is a reviewer. So
Okay.
this should be okay then.
Mm-hmm.
Looks like they've got some tests fixed. All right. That was nice and simple. Wait, did I do this wrong? No, I did it right. Maybe the bot is just being slow. That's fine. Okay, we have another one from a couple days ago from the same gentleman. Alexander is giving us a lot of options here. All right, what do we think? Service controller stuff. Possible fix in there as well. Who would be the right reviewer for this?
Is there someone assigned to for the PR?
Take a look. Some familiar names. Well, it looks like Antonio is saying hold here. Looks like Antonio is looking at it so far.
Yeah, it seems like a pretty valid issue, so I would accept it.
Okay, great. Wonderful. Now let's see if we have anything else. Oh, we have one from last week, and then we go back to 2021. At some point, we should go through and clean up those old ones. Looks like we've got a failing test for GCE. See. Oh, maybe possibly hitting limits. What do we think about the SIG release master blocking test? Well, it looks like it's been fine since then. I don't know if this is something that's going to require intervention since it isn't failing right now. It looks like it does fail from time to time, but those are, I guess, timeout related. What do we think?
It definitely seems more like a flake, but I guess it could be like some sort of corner case or something.
Well, it sounds like it, at least the person commenting here thinks that it's a timeout. So if this is true, then that problem could get worse over time if it starts always hitting that timeout. Like this might not be one that we can ignore because it might start being every run.
It sounds like, if I'm reading correctly, we have a 3-hour timeout for the test run, and over time we just add more and more tests. And so by the time we're calling the teardown, we passed 3 hour. Is that correct?
It looks like that is happening, and it looks like it happens from time to time. But certainly the fact that it's not happening always means that we're not always hitting that limit. But I suppose if you ever end up just kind of on the wrong side of chance, you'll hit it. And I would imagine that will get worse over time.
But this is like an error during the teardown of the test. Is that?
Yeah, it looks like the teardown or timeout is what's failing because it runs out of time, I guess. See. Oh, no, that's an interesting question. If the teardown is failing, does that mean that we could be leaking resources and we could be using up more of our GCP resources than we should be because we have stuff that doesn't get torn down? That could be a concern.
Right. Yeah. Like, do we have some sort of Reaper task that goes through and cleans stuff up after? Like, I don't know that infrastructure well enough, but that would be my concern there.
Okay. So what we need is somebody who can determine whether or not a failed test is wasting GCP resources. What do we think, Andrew?
Yeah, I agree. I don't have capacity to look into that, so someone else can take it.
Sure.
Yeah, this might be
okay.
Larock. You said you knew some people who were looking to get more involved. Do you know anyone who's looking to do some triage work, maybe? Because this is something that could take some investigation to figure out what's going on there.
Yes, I could. I have a couple of people that's interested in triage work. I'm just actively listening now, trying to figure out everything myself, but it's something I could perfectly give the person.
Okay.
Yeah, I think like a really easy next step for this is maybe just throwing a message in the test infra Slack channel and just saying, hey, like we notice teardown failing in some cases. Do we have a cron job or something that's like cleaning them up or something? I know the test infra folks are like very actively looking at cost. So I'm certain that if the cost was like snowballing out of control because of this, they would catch it pretty fast. So I'm not too worried about it, but be good to just make sure.
Yeah, looking at the failure rate too from the test grid we were looking at. Yeah, like it doesn't fail enough that it's like it would be wasting a lot of resources.
Yet.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's also a good signal though. Like we don't want to just like increase the timeout as well, because the flake could be an indication that there is still some regression that's causing the test to run longer. It may not be that we just added more tests. So these are the kind of flakes that are like really tricky to kind of root cause. But I would not do anything right now though, because the signal could be useful like a little bit later.
Okay, great. Okay, so that is our triage. If you have not yet, by the way, feel free to add your name to that attending list. The doc is in the chat. Sub-project updates. Do we have anyone from Alibaba or Baidu? AWS?
Yeah, no specific update.
Okay, great. For Azure, I just noted that we did release new versions a few weeks ago, but since last time I was on this meeting anyway. And it's very exciting to see these versions moving along. It's like, wow, we're almost done with 1.25, y'all. Yikes. Okay. Let's see. Huawei, IBM Cloud.
Nope, no update now today.
Okay. OpenStack, vSphere. Michael, do we have anything from the extraction migration that we want to give as an update?
No, I think like at this point, well, like, you know, we merged the cap, so we are officially in beta state now. And actually that, like, in some weird ways that buys us a lot of time, because in the cap, we agreed that one of the GA requirements we had was that we would go 2 cycles without any major regressions. So aside from monitoring tests and kind of keeping the work what we're doing, we probably won't have to visit this again for another few months until we start the 1.31 cycle, at which point, you know, if we have had any regressions, you know, we'll reset the counter or whatever. I guess we'll just keep an eye on it. So I guess everyone keep an eye. If you see some major regressions in the testing, like, let's bring them up here and make sure we get them smoothed out before we, you know, for the next step. So we have a little bit of time now. So
Great. Fantastic. Okay, in terms of agenda items, I've added a link to tell everyone that please clap. Almiko and I finally filed the 2022 annual report. And the takeaway we learned from that is we probably want to start taking some notes for the 2023 report near the end of the year, because one of the questions it asks is, how many members do you have in your meeting Slack channel, blah, blah, blah. Like, and a bunch of those are things that it's harder to get the numbers months later. So seeing, like, you know, what's the number of this, the number of that? And it's like, as of December, hope you remember. So that will be our takeaway there, is we'll work on a little 2023 a little earlier. But feel free to take a look at that if you're interested in what that looks like. All right.
thanks, Bridget, for submitting that too.
Thank you for working with me on it. Okay, Almiko, let's talk about load balancer.
Yes. And I realized this might have been a better topic for like an Azure, you know, meeting, but like I figured since it's SIG Cloud Provider, I might as well bring it up here.
Yeah.
So as we are preparing kind of the next version of OpenShift in Red Hat, we've been doing some testing, and one of the things that we're testing on is Azure Stack Hub, which is
this is my face because it's so inconsistent with the rest of Azure. Like, oh
right,
boy. Okay.
Right. So for those who are not familiar, you know, there's the Azure product, which is kind of like the general cloud, and then Azure Stack Hub is kind of like an on-prem type deal. It's one of these things where you can buy, like, you know, a ready rack, and then you just plug it in and you've got like an Azure right there, like under your own
Azure-ish.
Yeah, Azure-ish. Yeah, thank you. There's, you know, there was a demo several years ago, I think at like AWS reInvent or something, where they brought a big semi truck onto the stage, and it had like a shipping container on the back of it, and it was like, this shipping container is like a data center ready to go. And so like this is kind of a similar type of product, you know, probably minus the shipping container.
This meeting is recorded, just reminding you.
Oh yeah, for sure. No, I mean, it was cool. It was all cool and everything. I'm not like no shame in anyone's game here, for sure.
And no shame, by the way. And Azure Stack Hub is lovely. I'm just saying it's not the same as Azure. So let's be careful when we say Azure. It's like, well, it's Azure Stack Hub. It's different. So
right, and that kind of gets to the core of the issue that we're seeing, which is that it looks like the Azure CCM, which is also used on the Stack Hub, when it, you know, Stack Hub does not allow you to use standard style load balancers from Azure's, you know, SKU catalog. So you can only use the basic style load balancers. And it appears that in the old in-tree CCM, this works, where worker nodes get added to the cluster. But when we go to the external CCM, what we're seeing is that it is now rejecting those nodes based on the load balancer configuration. And so I don't know that this is necessarily a bug yet, but what I'm looking for is I'm trying to figure out if there's maybe a configuration option that we should have set, or something that we misconfigured on the CCM there. So I reached out in the provider Azure channel as well, just to try and get a little more advice. But I didn't know if maybe this is something you've seen before, Bridget, or maybe, you know, maybe
I haven't dug into the Slack thread yet. because I'm signed into Slack on a different computer than the one I'm talking to you on. So I'll have to go and click through and look at it over there. But what I can say is Azure Stack Hub is very different than Azure. And I work closely with some people who are deeply technical in Azure Stack Hub, so I'm happy to bring this question to them. The caveat being, it's sometimes easier to give them a link to a GitHub issue versus a Slack thread. So like I can start with the Slack thread, but do we happen to have anything like in the in GitHub yet?
I don't
If we
think
don't,
so.
it's okay. But
Yeah, no, I haven't opened an issue yet because I'm not 100% sure that it's a bug, but maybe just opening an issue to say, hey, here's what I'm seeing. And maybe the answer is just, yeah, you need to set this configuration value and then it'll all be happy or something.
well, and then we should also document that, presumably, like, because I don't have a good answer, but I know exactly who to ask, and I will
Okay.
go message him right after this meeting. But
Okay, cool. Yeah, that'd be awesome. I was also going to ask, like, do you know, I saw when I was doing a Git blame on some of this code that like Cecile was one of the last people to touch this like 2 years ago. Do you think it's worthwhile to reach out to her? Or?
so I mean, like, again, the reason that she would have had anything to do with it is because the folks who were working on AKS Engine had some intersection with Azure Stack Hub.
Oh, gotcha.
We
Okay,
deprecated AKS Engine. The Azure Stack Hub people actually still have a public repo on GitHub that is their fork of AKS Engine that they're still using.
Okay.
So it's like, yes, Cecile did have involvement in that, but it's kind of moved to the side and isn't really her area at this point.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
I'll sync up with you in Slack outside the
Yeah.
meeting and maybe we can kind of answer it there. Thanks for
Yep.
at least listening.
Yeah, I at least know who to ask. So, all right. Yes, we'll figure that out. Okay. Next up, Andrew.
Yeah. So I mean, Michael already covered it in the sub project updates, but just also wanted to call out that the KEP was merged for promoting the feature gates to beta that turn off the entry providers, and also just huge thanks to Michael for doing a whole rework of that KEP and addressing a lot of hard questions about the whole thing. So really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Like I'm happy that we got it all in there. Like I was not confident last Thursday. Let's put it that way.
Well,
Yeah,
you made the
worked out.
deadline.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Laurent, you have a question.
Yes, I have a question. How everyone's doing? Last meeting we had, it wasn't the SIG meeting, but it was a sub project meeting. I just will have a couple questions. I'm trying to set up end-to-ends and trying to talk to providers and seeing if they will allocate resources. So right now I know AWS is doing it and GCP. I just want to see if anybody have insights or any suggestions on going about that.
Almiko?
Yeah, so I think one of the things probably to understand here too is the credits program. I know that the testing folks, I think, are the ones who own this, but like there's a program that we have where cloud providers can basically give credits to the Kubernetes testing effort, and then we use those credits to run, kind of the infrastructure tests on those other cloud providers. So I think part of this, and you'll probably have to ask where more of the information around the credits program is, because I've never seen it personally. But I think probably a useful thing to do would be to understand what the credits program is, and then bring that to some of the other providers so that you can say, here's how we've done it with AWS and GCP. Would you be interested in that?
Okay.
Right.
And
I think the people who can answer that question are probably the ones on the infra channel on Kubernetes Slack. Is it like SIG infra or something like that? SIG testing infra. Yeah.
And the second question is, I'm working on the new contributor experience for Cloud Provider. And I just want to understand if anybody could give like any feedback or any resources to look up and research. I seen the KEP was great for one of them. and they had a lot of information that would be great for a newcomer to the SIG. And I wonder if there's more resources like that out there that's probably hiding.
That's actually an excellent question that was asked, and I'm just clicking over to it to show you. It was asked in the annual report, actually, was, hey, are you helping new contributors starting to work on this project? And what the answer that we gave here in the annual report, and I'll say to you, is because of the effort to move things out of tree, at this point, we're trying to focus most of the work on the specific out of tree cloud providers. So deciding where to get involved has a lot to do with which provider do you want to work on, because that way you'll be able to work on, say you want to work on provider GCP, then you'd be working in their code base, and it would be different than, say, the AWS provider. So that's why I can't give like a general answer, because we are very deliberately pulling apart these code bases. Do you want to, Andrew, you want to kind of weigh in on that?
Yeah, no, I agree with everything you said. It generally does help to, like pick like a specific implementation and contribute that way. And usually those kind of contributions will trickle upstream into the main repository and the various libraries and dependencies.
So I'm going to put this link in the chat to the SIG Cloud Provider, the SIG repo, because one thing that you might find interesting just looking in here is all of the sub-projects. And so look at all of those providers. They all have links to a bunch of different repos. And so at that point, like say you start to be interested in provider IBM Cloud, you could obviously reach out to John, or you could take a look in these various repos and be like, oh, this is actually really relevant to my interests. You can kind of see it goes to a lot of different repos. There isn't necessarily one, happy path of this is how you do cloud provider. Well, there's a lot of different ways.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And for what it's worth, Larak, I've added some of these links and advice into the notes doc, so you can go back to the agenda and find these later.
Wonderful. And I would say if you have a specific provider that you're interested in, you have people here from a variety of providers who would be probably happy to chat with you further or direct you to the people who know more.
And Oracle. For me personally, it's Azure and Oracle. I know somebody that's on my team really like AWS, but me it's really Azure and Oracle.
Okay, great. Yeah, I don't think any of our OCI people are here today. But from Azure, I am here. And I would say over on the provider Azure channel on Kubernetes Slack is a good place to jump over there, and then we can sync with the people. Yeah, absolutely. I'll just put that channel link. All right.
I was going to say too, Larak, with respect to like new contributor experience too, since you're kind of focusing on like, okay, theoretically there are these new people out there and they want to figure out some way to contribute, and SIG Cloud Provider is where they've ended up, and that's where they want to contribute. I think what Bridget is saying about like kind of the preferred provider and looking at the sub projects and whatnot, that's a great exercise to think about with the new contributors. And you kind of just mentioned it too, like you were like, well, I'm interested in Azure and OCI. And I think this is part of the guidance that's really powerful to give new contributors. Say like, hey, look, if you're really curious about a specific cloud, or you are very comfortable with a specific provider and that's your preferred one, that's a great place to start looking, because you already have some familiarity with the environment that you're working in. And so you might already have some notions about how to test on those platforms, how to set things up on those platforms. So I think just as much as pointing people to the actual repos, some of this teaching people like, okay, well, if you're already interested in mom and pop cloud, maybe go look at their CCM and then figure out, how to contribute there. So I think that's a good part of this too.
Yeah, thanks. I'm thinking around now. I'm getting a broad understanding of it.
Great. And then I think, Almika, one of the other things that's come up when people have asked about this before, I think on Cloud Provider Slack before, is we also told people that depending on what your interests are, starting in a slightly different SIG, like something like Cluster API, might give you an opportunity to work in an environment that is a lot more approachable for new contributors, while still gaining some understanding of the cloud you're working in. Because all these providers have their own Cluster API project as well. And so if you wanted to go work on Cluster API for GCP or for Azure or for Oracle, et cetera, those all exist. So, and I'll drop a link in the chat to that as well.
Thanks.
Okay, let's see. What else do we got? I think we have one more sleep until Brooklyn? No, we have like one more meeting before Chicago.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, we'll be here on the 25th. And then I guess November 8th would be our next normal meeting after that, but we traditionally do not run this meeting during KubeCon. So yeah. All right, well, do we have any other topics before we want to say farewell for now? Okay. I'm going to stop sharing. Oh, I was going to put that Cluster API link in the chat really quick. Just a second before you say goodbye. Here we go, Cluster API. Yeah, take a look in there because that's also going to be relevant to your interests almost certainly. Okay.
And I just went ahead and canceled the meeting on the 8th.
Very smart. All right, well, we'll see you all on the 25th. And then after that, Chicago for some. Okay.
Cool.
Take care.
Thanks, Bridget.
Yeah, thanks. Bye.